Okay. Hello and welcome. Today we have Patricia Kong with us, and she doesn't really need an introduction per se, but I will still give a quick introduction for her for those who would be meeting her for the first time. So Trish is the product owner for Scrum.org Enterprise Solution Program, which actually handles multiple very well-known programs, out of which one is the evidence-based management. Nexus is another one. And she's a very prolific speaker, fluent in multiple languages, and her talks have been really inspiring for the last several years. Today is going to be another one such session. So stick to your seats and witness one of the most encouraging sessions for this Regional Scrum Gathering Kolkata 2021. Another few sessions that I would definitely be talking about is the evidence-based management and why on time and on budget doesn't really work. So that is what I would talk about. Patricia, now it is all over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was just thinking introducing the name of that session might get me some enemies without knowing, but it's nice to see you all virtually. I'm in the Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. I'm actually at the Scrum.org offices all alone. It's quite cold here. My hands are actually turning purple. So if you see me fidgeting, it's probably because I'm just sitting on my hands to make sure that I can move them around. So I know that there are people from all around the world attending today. But as I understood, it is a regional talk with people from Calcutta. And I was just telling our friends there that several years ago, I actually had the pleasure of visiting Calcutta. It's the only place I've been in India. And it's really nice for me to know and understand the people that I'm talking with. But I will say, I've done many things there. It's a life-changing event for me to be there. I went to puja, I did many things. My sister was getting married there. But since then, so we're talking like 15 years, I have not been able to eat Indian food since then because it was so good there. And especially I was eating at a wedding. So that's just something I wanted to share with you because not many people I meet besides my brother-in-law are from Calcutta. So today I'm here to talk with you about the future of work. And I put in this tag, I have a very simple presentation because it's really, I want to be able for us to have a real conversation during these times. I think it is amazing that people are putting on so many events and that there is this spirit of learning that still exists for us to try to express and improve ourselves. But I think that when we talk about the future of anything right now, it would be more meaningful for us to have a real conversation. So about me, this is me. I'm leading enterprise solutions and leadership at Scrum.org. In my introduction, you heard about some of the things that I think about and that I do. Generally, what enterprise and leadership as an activity means at Scrum.org is that we're thinking about what is it that is going on beyond the team that we can do in an organization to support the team. And also the goodness that we find at the team level from Scrum, from Agile, how do we express that in an organization? So I think a lot about that. That obviously means that I have organizational behavior psychology interests. I'm delving more into the psychology aspect. But you'll see why, for instance, something called evidence-based management, where I think about how do we actually inspect and adapt at a larger level? Why does that apply so that we can do that for the organization? Scrum.org, I hope many of you are familiar with us, but this is really who Scrum.org has been throughout this time. So instead of just showing the training, education, certification, I wanted to show something from last year during this time, how we came together. These are professional Scrum trainers we have around the world coming together to thinking about how do we continue this journey as we see, for instance, this event, how it's well executed so that we can still have the same experiences and share those experiences and knowledge. So that's that. All right. My gosh, last year was 2020 and everybody was telling everybody else that 2020, once 2020 is finished, especially in the United States, 2020 was a big year. Once 2020 is finished, it'll all be good. And now what we're looking at is 2021, which in less than a month for me has been as crazy as 2020. All right. And 2020, unfortunately, it's known as the year of COVID, but it's been a reckoning for many of us. And what we've understood during this time of COVID and just this companies and organizations really having to rethink what they're doing. In the past year, what we've seen is that notion of agile and an agile way of working has accelerated, right? So nothing here I'm saying is going to be new. And what we understood, what we observed, and McKinsey has done a lot of studies on this, our friends at McKinsey. But what they found when they did some surveys, and from our surveys and research, is that organizations with an agile mindset have been able to fare and navigate these times better than other organizations. Agility was found to be the common characteristic in organizations that were able to adapt. And again, what I'm saying, it seems obvious because these are the concepts that we've been promoting about how do you actually need to react to change. It can't all be efficiency. How does change work with that, right? The caveat here that I'm going to specify is that when we think about organizations, I'm going to specify that I say agile mindset. And it's not necessarily just what we think of, oh, they were agile, they did better. Because the thing that was going on in the United States around, all the things that you may have seen in the news and politics, it really made me think about agile in the same way that former activist American politician John Lewis talked about democracy. It's not an achieved state, but it's something that we have to continue to work toward, and each must do its part. Because in the same way that I've seen organizations thrive or sustain themselves during this past year, when we've been pushed against this wall, when we've pushed in a way that forces us to think in a scarcity mindset, there are many organizations where we had followed for years through a transformation and they did well. And then what happened was during the time of COVID, because of groups of people decided to manage in a certain way or make certain decisions, they reverted. And they saw that their transformation efforts started to go away. So it was literally, you know what, we need more control. Command and control is back in. We need to organize these things. And you saw the impact that they started to have in business start to change. And so that is really what I mean when I talk about organizations that have an agile mindset, that they can still think about this new way or this other way of working. I don't want to say that it's new, right? Because it's over 20 years. But it's allowing them to really adapt and ebb and flow. And I think that that's something that I'll touch upon and explore with you guys later, because it's really important. One of the things that we think about and talk about is all these, at scrum.org and enterprises, all these zombie transformations. And I think during this time, what you see really is, what are these zombie transformations? Now, when we looked at these different organizations that have an agile mindset, and I want to say this caveat that in the time that we are fearful, we revert back to what we know. These companies revert back, these people in positions of power reverted back to command and control. It's something to be aware of. So the themes that we saw in the notion of the organizations with an agile mindset, I'll get right to it, is I was thinking, and I grouped them into this notion of having vision, really thinking about empowerment and accountability. And when I was doing some research, and we've been thinking about the future of work, a lot of consulting organizations and research will say, hey, you know what's going to get you through these times when you think about the future of work? It's vision. And I'm thinking, haven't we been saying that for a long time? Isn't that obvious? Why are we saying that in 2021? Our research says you must have a vision. And I thought it was a little bit funny, but then I thought it was a little bit sad, because it means that there's still a need. There's still a need for us to express these things. And it's really important. And we can see that in the additions in the Scrum Guide. Before COVID, I actually made a big update to the evidence-based management guide to to include this notion of goals and how we work toward them. So when we think about the notion of vision, what's interesting is that when you think about the things when we talk about agile transformation or how do we innovate and become more stable? I think the tension that has been really interesting is this notion actually between innovation and scaling. So you're trying to innovate, you're doing well, you want to innovate faster, but then when that works, when that's making impact, you need to scale it. You need to add process to it to make it more scalable. When you're scaling, you become big, maybe even a little bit bloated, but it's about managing a problem. And then all of a sudden you're told you're too big, you have too many processes, so you now need to go faster, be more agile, and again, innovate. And it's this dynamic, it's these two little balance, this balance of circles that you're trying to hit there. And the one thing that can really solve that tension is vision, is goals. So I think it is worthwhile for us to talk about this notion of if we're really thinking about the future of work and we're really thinking about organizations and sustaining themselves, how do we think about vision, right? So when we talk about vision is something that invites people to join a purpose. Now, it also encourages momentum. It gives us a focus. And there are all these things that we know about vision. Let me get into how we talk about vision in something that's inspiring and how we talk about goals. So in the evidence-based management framework, in the guide, we recently added this notion of goals and how you think about goals so that we can start working to actually achieve goals. We talk about this notion of having a strategic goal, which is something that is ambitious, something that inspires you to work toward. And then you can break that down into, well, okay, if I'm working toward those things, what are some other smaller things that I might do to achieve that, right? So we have the intermediate goal, and then we have to think about tactical things that we would do. So if you're aligning that and you're using Scrum, you think, okay, we have this vision, we have this big goal we're trying to hit. What are some things that we're doing from a release perspective or a sprint perspective that are aligned to those? The product goal, that might be, for instance, it could be your intermediate goal, something that you're trying to do. But I think it gives a good way for us to think about them. However you think about goals, I think one thing that we say in the guide that's very important is to think about how are they actually specific and measurable. And it's specific and measurable, but it doesn't have to have all the other things in SMART goals, because what we're really looking to do is to make sure that we're reaching towards something that's inspiring. We're looking to reach toward a strategic goal that is looking towards something where we can unlock an opportunity for our customers. So if you're familiar with the evidence-based management framework, there's 4 key value areas that we talk about. And we talk about the market capability, so current value, where are we now as an organization? And unrealized value, what is out there from a marketplace that is worth pursuing? What is something that we may want to pursue to solve a problem for our users or customers? And then we have time to market, ability to innovate. You're looking at measurements in these different areas to see if you're working in a way that is actually improving and working toward those goals. Goals, I would think your strategic goals are coming from that unrealized value area. You're really looking to lock into that opportunity. The other thing when we're thinking about goals that is important is to think about them from an outcome perspective. So how is that actually doing something for a person? What problem is it solving for a person or for a group of clients or customers or users? And the reason that it's important to think about goals that way for me is because when they are turned into outputs, they're not big and ambitious and strategic. No matter actually how big they are, they devolve themselves almost into a task list. And so if there's something to watch out for, if you are using OKRs, is that when you're using OKRs, really think about those objective key results, what outcomes, objective key outcomes you're actually looking for. Because a lot of the times this gets abused in the other ways that everything gets abused, and it becomes an output. And now all you're doing is just hitting the nail with a different hammer. So if you are using something like OKRs, or you're having that conversation about goals, think about that from an outcome-based perspective. What opportunity are we trying to solve, for whom, why? And I think that that's really going to align us a lot closer. I know OKRs are hot. I know we talk about empiricism and trying to iterate toward them. It's something that I've seen it used in a way that has made teams very depressed, because what they have on the wall is the OKR, and it's just like, do this 10 times, that kind of stuff, right? So something that I've been watching out for. The other thing about vision, and that's compelling to me, that maybe may help us think about it differently, is obviously we're thinking about it from a business perspective. I've been alluding to that, but vision has this thing that inspires, and we're whether we consider ourselves smart people or not, we're in this industry, and it means that we're going to question why we do things and what would make this happen. What problem are we trying to solve? So when we have a vision, what that does is it allows people to join in and participate. It's an invitation. So people are opting into this rather than I am assigning you this goal or this thing that you need to do. I'm assigning you this theme. And when we have those visions and we can make it tangible and think about these goals that we're trying to hit, and we use something like EBM or whatever it is, these measurements that look at how you're getting there, what you're doing is you're walking and you're taking a journey together. So when I talk about measurement in EBM, what I want people to be aware of is that when we're looking at measurement, what it's allowing us to do is to collaborate together to make different decisions, or to make same decisions based on the best evidence we have available. It's really important to think about that, because we're trying to get somewhere. The thing about something like the goals and working toward that is because if we don't do those incremental iterative things, we may be working toward a goal that does not make sense anymore. So it's something that's it's complex, and to think about there. So I want to add something in here, just because it's just me and the screen and you. Every year during New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, people go, Happy New Year. What are your goals for the year? And I hate that. And I said, how can I hate that? I felt bad, actually. How can I hate that? I'm talking about goals all the time. I believe in it. I work with organizations. Why don't I have goals for myself? And I think that people are going to get a little bit tired of this notion of goals, but they're important. And the way that, especially with someone with my personality, is that I actually have to think about it this way. What is my intention? What is my intention for this year? What is the intention of what I'm trying to do? And so something like goals and vision actually drives me wildly motivated, because it really says that's the vision, that's the thing that we're trying to work toward. What is my intention for this year to try to hit that? Just a different way to think about it if you have a personality that's a little bit like me, because I can even find goals constricting. So it's just a way to think about that. So again, have a vision, invite people to join that, think about that from a leadership perspective. The question that I would ask you to consider right now is, are you aware of a vision? Do you have strategic goals, or do you have goals that you're working with, or that you're sharing, or that you're coming up with that are actually about unlocking an opportunity? What those will do is that those will help you develop this notion of trust. Not that management trusts people who are doing the work, but trust in a way that allows us to acknowledge that trust is a two-way street. This is why vision, goals, EBM, all of this is compacted into this conversation. I'm hitting it a little bit lightly, but there's a lot of stuff to think about there. So think about that. And when we have and we share this vision, we're inviting teams to participate in pursuing it. We're discovering the value that we can pursue for this together, and we're essentially planning the same party. I'm using a lot of this participate, this join, and this language like this, because when we think about the future, when we think about our children, when we think about, all the choices people have and how, we're even learning education is accelerated. The act of persuasion, there's a little bit of psychology of persuasion, is very much about people joining in and about participation and buy-in, right? So that people have this choice, and they usually will say, I want to join in, I would like to collaborate with you. So I'm using this language very precisely. All right, empowerment was the second one. So if we agree that teams create value and we should empower the teams, what are the rest of the people meant to do? If we agree that teams are the people, and you see this in the Scrum Guide, right? Scrum Guide, Scrum teams are accountable for creating an increment of value. What are the rest of the teams what are the rest of the people supposed to do? And I think that what the rest of the people are meant to be doing in modern organizations is to help through those goals, right? Help through those strategic goals, come up with that, use bottom-up intelligence, and figure out how to offer enough autonomy that the teams need to really empower them. And think about things that will help them if they're creating value, share experiences, share knowledge. So that might be through community of practices. But what we naturally see is when you get teams together, you get people together, they will form themselves into ways that they're just sharing likewise information that's interesting to them. So think about that. How do you do things otherwise when you think about the future of leadership, one that is developing people and teams? How do you think about what technology they might need, what environment they might need? We are all in, behind these screens right now. What is it that we really need? Do we know? Is there some way that we can feel more connected to each other rather than just looking at each other through a screen, right? If there's fatigue from the screen, what do we need to do to remove that? But it's really, for me, this notion of what can we do, bottom-up intelligence, think about the goals so that we can kind of all work toward the same way, but also what do we need to do to get things out of the ways for the teams and make sure that there's some cohesion there and that we're developing their interests. The thing that gets a little iffy here, because I always have to talk at things from two sides, is that you can have a community of practice or something like that, but you don't want to have something that feels like it's forced upon people, I think. Because once you do that, it loses its value. So it's this light way of how do we really find this community of practice where I can share and have shared experiences, learn things from other people. And we see that, for instance, in our professional Scrum trainer community at scrum.org. There are over 300 professional Scrum trainers. Naturally, they're organizing into topics or areas and they become friends and, of the things that they're interested in. So how do you do that? And those are a bunch of independent people joining together. We'll see the same behavior in organizations if we set up the space for them. And a lot of that creativity is going to emerge. A lot of that different knowledge will emerge from that. So that's something that we can think about in terms of empowerment. And then when teams, and I'm just talking a lot about teams for this, when teams are empowered toward a vision, a goal, and we're thinking about empowerment, we're really just at the same party, right? So we're all present at the same party. So if vision is like we're planning the party together and we're all into it, then empowerment is we're really present and we're having fun at this party together. So the last thing, when I tied the themes together of thinking about this organizational agile mindset, when we think about the future, at a high level, it's really about accountability. So another update from the Scrum Guide, for me, that was a central theme, was around this notion of accountability. The word role was moved out, not that the role isn't important, but that it is for us together to think about something and be accountable for what we're building and working toward, right? So that was a central theme. And it says the entire Scrum team is accountable for creating a valuable, useful increment every sprint. I think what that does is it helps us think about how we're in this together. And it helps us think about when we're looking at something that we're working toward what makes sense for us to realize that we've achieved it. And so this kind of re-emphasizes the EBM thinking. But this really just, I think, gives us more space, and I'll pull it in this direction, where I think that accountability and the stress of accountability in the Scrum Guide really exposes the Scrum values, and if they exist in a team or an organization or a group. And the reason is because once we are all accountable, so this is like, now it's gonna hopefully move that behavior from the PO is the one that's getting told by managers, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you do. The PO goes to this, I've been told what to do, this is what you need to do. And the Scrum Master saying is, we need to do this all together. It's kind of, if you can edge that away, this accountability, if we are empowered, working toward a vision, what this allows us to do is, I think, to create a little bit more equity. And I think equity not only in a Scrum team, but equity with the team and the rest of the organization. And it allows us, I think, to grasp onto the idea of commitment. But also, I think what's really important is that it gives us space to be more open. So if we're accountable, now we're not nervous to just say, this is what I've been told to do. It allows us to be open to more ideas and to be more creative, so that we can work really to try to achieve some value together as a team, because we're accountable. So if vision is really like, this is what we're going to plan for our party, and empowerment is we're all going to have a great time and be present at this party, then accountability is we're all going to want to ensure that this party is a success for everyone, right? And this is, this kind of dives into psychological safety and all those things that we can look at. And Scrum, when we think about this and how this ties into Scrum and Agile, I think it's very interesting because Scrum and Agile, the outcomes of these things is really to look at increased business value, decrease non-value adding waste, managing risk exposure. But when we look at the three topics that I just hit on, it's impressive for me, because when you think about the events and how they can be re-examined and used, we're talking about refreshing. I think it really, if you give an opportunity for those things to happen, you'll see them specifically in the events, right? So how are we planning? What are we focusing on? Why are we doing this? And then obviously the daily Scrum, where we can come together and collaborate. But for me, where I've seen this work really amazing is how people have redefined the sprint review and sprint retrospective. So in the sprint review, I've seen this happen in a couple ways, where what these organizations are looking for with their teams is really to help them feel legitimized and to feel connected. Teams are working really hard, but they're not sure why. And when you do something in the review where I've seen clients, they get invited in, what we're not only doing is shortening that feedback loop, they are really engaged in this notion of, how at the review can I really connect with stakeholders and get feedback? And that really motivates me to want to do a better job, because I've seen the face, I understand the customer, all that stuff. I've seen it done in a different way in the sprint retrospective, where, we're collaborating together. But what they did is that I think every quarter or so, there's this organization where they would have a retrospective, thinking about retrospectives in a different way, where we had a retrospective with our stakeholders and clients to say, how are we working together? What is it that we want to do to improve our relationship? And I thought that was a really interesting way. So when you think about the events and how they can lift up this notion of accountability, empowerment, and vision, I think those are different ways that you might say, hey, are we looking at things that really are trying to drive the Agile mindset into the organization? So of course, I wanted to just hit on that. All right. So again, 2020, we knew these things were coming. We understand that those are the things, the way that we've been working are really setting up organizations very well for them to be able to inspect and adapt and sustain into the future. 2021 is here. 2021 has been here for 30 days, and I've already gone through more than I wish I did. But to tell you the truth, I've been thinking about this talk for a lot. There's so much about the future of work right now. There's so much about, how we can think about the role of the Scrum Master in the future, and what does this mean for Scrum teams, and the way of Scrum is the future, the way of working, and we have to understand, that we're all people, and things that talk about robots. But I have to say, when I think about the future of Agile, even, or the future of work, what I see a lot, it goes back to that original story I told, where we had a client and the client was working, and then this stuff is making us really nervous, and they revert back to the command and control. And it really makes me think about transformations in general. So this whole notion of zombie transformations, and what happens when you have agility working really well, but what happens when you remove the person who's the champion, or you remove, because there's a consulting company, I've heard it expressed this way, the cocoon that are around those teams. What we find is that it dissipates, right? What we find is that even though there was amazing impact and it was something that could get achieved, that we could spread this way of working with other teams, what we found was that no matter what happened, once you remove that person or that cocoon, or the people who are protecting the teams, or the people who had the power, a lot of it went away. And time and time again, what it was creating was a lot of fatigue. I think I'm in agile transformation fatigue. Of course, this was recorded, so now everybody knows. But it's that you come and you do this, and then you see it go away, and then you fight it again, right? You fight. It's like an uphill battle. And I thought that was really sad. There's a dynamic there that really has to be explored. And Scrum.org, we've looked at different models of how to express this, and that it should be team by team. How do you support those teams? How do you embody those three things that I just talked about, those themes, to try to get that in the organization? But I think I realized that I was approaching it from a mindset of like, I'm sad for the organization. But when you look at what happens when that power or that person or that cocoon gets removed, what I started to look into was, well, what happened? What happened to those people? And what you see is that those people, they've enjoyed working on this team so well that they just move on to other places that they fit in more. Or there's some people who are just saying, you know what, I'm going to stay, and I'm going to continue pursuing this initiative, or really making an impact for our organization. And I thought that is a really interesting way to think about this. So what I want to show now is how we start to think about success for us, right? So success, obviously, there's a value conversation and all these things, but I really want to think about how success with Scrum and Agile demands engagement. So I'm going to ask you, take a quick look. So I have this, we talk about professionalism at Scrum.org, and improving professionalism. But look at these things and see if they can be ticked off for you. So professionalism, values behavior, disciplined and focused, outcome-oriented, help others, commitment. Fundamentally, right, we're looking, is this an empirical process? Are we self-managed, empowered and supported, continuous improvement, vision? Are these things that we're engaging in? And this will be here for you to look at, are these behaviors, are these characteristics that you have? But I want to flip it over, because the way that I'm starting to think about the future of work is, we think so much about what's going on and how we can work together to improve something for the client. But I'm starting to think about, what can organizations do? What do they need to do to also think about the future of work? What is their engagement for employee satisfaction and retention? This is really important, because what we're going to see, I think, is talent go in some different ways. So when you look at, for instance, professionalism and values and behavior, is the organization allowing you to act professionally? Do you want to engage professionally here? If you don't, why, right? So if you're being held captive, who's holding you captive at why? This is a lot of real talk here. But when you look at this and you look at it from the other perspective, does the company fundamentally, if we're talking about doing Agile, are they interested in, empirical processes? Are they allowing us to be self-managed? Continuous improvement. My God, I have improvement fatigue. It's always improve, just improve. Like, I don't want to improve, I'm tired. It's because we don't have a vision, right? There's nothing that's motivating to go that way. Are these things being provided? And if not, why? And what can we do to make sure that those are being provided? Because I think that when we think about employees, there's something that's going to happen, in my opinion, where it's going to have trouble retaining talent, because people are either going to start going, you know what, I'm tired, just give me something where I can disengage, pay my check, I'll do something else with that money to try to have my life for a little bit. Or people will just start moving more individualistic and really think about how are they as independents, and that they're not able to really fulfill the damn pink, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But I think that there's something that's gonna break a little bit there. So I'm wondering, really, for the future of work, what does this mean for people to be able to be engaged and stay and challenged in their places of employment? Because as fatigue becomes a real thing, much more than just, how are we communicating with each other? How are we be able to fulfill ourselves? And it will lead down, I think, trickle down to where we're looking at what is the future of how people start to make a living. How there are people who say, you know what, I'm just going to make my money and I'll invest it in the stock market. And I'm talking from a very privileged place, but there are people who are 17 or 19 who are now saying, you know what, I'm going to get a job by editing YouTube videos. Let me just contact a few people on YouTube and ask them if they want a video editor. I never imagined that to be a job, right? And so what is driving them to think about themselves as a brand and individualistic? And is that something that we need to promote in a professional way that encourages people to be motivated within their surroundings, whether actually as an independent consultant or within an organization? So that was it for me. I hope that I've given you some things to think about. Those are the things that I'm thinking about. We talked about the vision, the empowerment, the accountability, how those are really big themes that we should dive deep into when we're thinking about the future and really thinking about motivation. But that thinking for me is really leading to those big questions of, what does this mean for us? Like me and you, us, in the future of work, what we're doing. What does this mean for the future that comes after us? But also when we talk about things like teams and all this stuff, it's getting into bigger questions. Like if we're in teams and we're supposed to be self-managing and we're all equal, well, are we really, right? So, and if we're not really, and we're secretly competing against each other, then what does the organization, the house, need to do to change that, the system? So those are things that I'm thinking about. Thank you for having me. Please feel free to connect with me. If you have thoughts around those conversations and want to have conversations, do reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, and I will look forward to chatting with you more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trish. That was wonderful. And as Trish mentioned, so she has shared her email ID as well. So if there are any questions which you would like her to answer, please feel free to reach out to her. On the Q&A box, we do have a question, pretty interesting one. And the question is from Mohammed Mustafa, and he's asking, do you think a role called project manager will exist after 10 years?
Yes. I think some company will have a role called project manager that will exist after 10 years. I do not think, but I will put it differently. I don't think that the skills of project management will go away, because it all depends on the work that we're doing. And if this requires some sort of project management, those skills around planning are interesting. So there will be something where some skills of project management are necessary, but there will be some things, like why on time, on budget doesn't matter, why some things will be removed. However, I will think about it this way. As we are getting into potentially a more of a gig economy, as we are potentially going into another way where it was, before we used to talk about projects, now it's product. I think there will be something very interesting when you think about the people who work engagement by engagement, project by project. They come in for a project, they come out, negative or positive, but I think that will have something that will delve into, requiring some project management skills.
I would hope that very well answers the question. So thank you so much. And it is very lovely of Trish to share her email ID. And so it gives us direct access to her in case you feel to reach out for further questions. And trust me, she has such a huge knowledge base with her. So ask about her evidence-based management. That is some area which has always fascinated me. And the list will go on. But at the scarcity of time, and Trish has actually consumed the time box to the dot. So we are just about time. And thank you once again. Thank you so much, Trish, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.